the computer, and I'm going to welcome everyone to our November set of NAISEF Journey to NAISEF webinars, talking today about filling out ISEF forms. And again, we have Renee Howell, who's the director of the NAISEF Fair, and is going to give us some tips and tricks for this very, very important part of the process. Welcome, Renee.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know that this is probably the least exciting part of doing your science fair is figuring out what forms to fill out. So hopefully this webinar will give you an idea of how to figure out exactly what forms you need. Hopefully at this point you all are looking at the ISEF website. So this is the general website. As soon as you click on, you will be directed here. When you're looking for the forms, you can access them from this website. You can go up to science competitions and drop down to where it says Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair. From here, there are a few key resources that I'm going to point out for y'all. You're going to want to go down to the bottom of the website where it says Rules and Guidelines. And I would strongly suggest you all read over the ISEF rules. We do abide by them at NAISEF, again, because we are affiliated with the International Science and Engineering Fair. But on this website, you will see there is the 2023 forms. Key things here, all of your students will need to complete forms 1, 1A, and 1B. So these first 3 forms here, every student will need to complete. The other forms here, the 1C, the 2, 3, 4, those are not necessarily things your students are going to have to complete, but they may have to. These depend on what content your student is researching. So if your student is researching things like microbes or using blood or saliva samples, anything from vertebrates, those will require additional forms. There are a ton of other forms. Again, if your students aren't doing anything like that, then you will only need these first 3 forms. I want to caution you all that if you do realize that your student is going to need things other than the forms 1, 1A, and 1B, then they also have to submit for pre-approval. So the deadline for pre-approval is, I believe, January 18th. They cannot begin experimentation until they receive approval from the Scientific Review Committee. So please be sure that you know whether or not they are doing experimentation on things like hazardous materials, vertebrate animals, human studies, anything that falls under one of those categories, they will need to get pre-approval. The best tool for figuring out what forms your students need, though, is this guy, which is the Rules Wizard. I'm going to go ahead and drop this link in the chat. And the Rules Wizard is fabulous because it tells you what exact forms you will need. So you can see here when you go to fill it out, it asks you what experiment includes. So if you're doing something with, say, recombinant DNA, then you will click that. If you are including other things like vertebrate animals, you would also select that. You will go to next page. And then key thing with this, if you are doing things with recombinant DNA, hazardous materials, vertebrate animals, you will need to designate what location your student is doing those experiments in. So let's say they're doing their recombinant DNA experimentation at a medical facility. And then is your project based on prior research that you've done? Some students are competing multiple years in a row and they are gaining up on previous experimentation that they've done. If your student happens to be one of these, you would select yes here. Otherwise, all of your students, if this is their first time competing, you will select no. We'll go to the next page. And then again, a series of further questions that you will go through. Non-invasive, non-intrusive, behavioral animal studies, that kind of thing. If your student's not doing any of these, again, if they are just doing a run-of-the-mill experiment, you'll click none of the above. With human participants, if your student is doing something as simple as collecting a survey from other people that they have fill out, that is considered a human study, and you will need to designate that as a human study and get pre-approval. But if your student is not doing any of those, again, none of the above. Interacting with any of the following groups. If you're not doing human studies, these again are things that you do not need to worry about. And then if you are reviewing pre-existing human studies, then you would need to select yes for this. But if you're not doing that, more questions. This is about hazardous chemicals. If your student is not doing this, you can select none of the above for most of these. Hazardous agents, we are not working with decomposing anything. And then once you get to the end, it gives you a summary. It tells you which of the forms that you need to complete. Again, all participants, 1, 1A, 1B. That is a given. You are also going to submit an abstract for your students. I will show you a research plan that you can use for that. And then these forms that it is suggesting, regulated research institution, that is, again, if you are doing something hazardous that involves vertebrate animals, recombinant DNA technology, hazardous, or tissues from vertebrate animals, then you do need to go to a regulated research institute, which would be things like OSU or another research institution, or something like a hospital where they have facilities specifically designated for those. Qualified scientist form, again, if you are doing something that requires you to fill out anything other than the 1A, and 1B, this just means that your student has somebody that they are talking to and corresponding with that is in this field and is an expert. And then potentially hazardous biological agents, which is because I selected, we were doing a recombinant DNA experiment. This is considered a potentially hazardous biological agent. So it's telling me that because we were doing the recombinant DNA, that we need to additionally have the Regulated Research Institute, the qualified science form, and the potentially hazardous biological agents forms. And this may be different for each of your students. Some of your students may need to complete extra forms versus some of your students that don't need to complete those extra forms. And if at any point you are working through the rules wizard and you're really not sure, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to like double check to make sure that we are getting all those forms in. Because again, if they don't get the proper forms in, they can be disqualified from competing at the higher level. And we certainly do not want that. So your first best friend is going to be the rules wizard. Your second best friend will be me. If you are confused by the rules wizard, I am here to help. Okay, so aside from your form 1, your 1A, your 1B, the other thing you're going to want is, so this is in our educator Google Classroom. If you are not already in it, I will drop the link in there for you momentarily. But this is the basic layout for all of the information that you are going to need for your students. It goes from the background research up through the hypothesis. This is everything that they're going to need on their poster board when they are actually presenting. And especially, again, if you are having students that are doing things like human participant research, vertebrate animals, microorganisms, etc., these forms are things that you're really going to want to look at. So this research plan has specific portions that you're going to need for filling out the ISEF forms that specifically pertain to methods and risk assessment. There's another section for potentially hazardous biological agents and potentially hazardous chemicals. So for many of you, I do not anticipate that all of you are going to be doing these experiments that involve the extra forms. So most of you are probably just going to need the first page of this template. Those of you that have students that are moving on to do things that require the pre-approval will need these next 3. But let's go ahead and take a look at our sponsor form. So form 1 is the checklist for adult sponsor / safety assessment. This is what you all, as the folks that are helping facilitate your students in the fair, will complete. Most of this is pretty straightforward. This is just you saying, I, as an adult, am helping fill this out on behalf of my student researchers. You will put the student's name or names. Again, your students can compete in teams of up to 3, so you will include all of them here. The project title, whatever they deem it, and then you check all of these boxes to confirm that you as the adult are doing things like reading the ISEF rules and guidelines, that you reviewed their checklist, their student checklist, which is their version of this form, and their research plan / summary. So I just showed y'all a research plan, that you've worked with the student, and that if your student is working with any of the following: humans, vertebrate animals, microorganisms, or RDNA tissues, etc., that you have done the proper forms and gotten approval from the scientific review committee, which is what that SRC abbreviation is for. This is a checklist to make sure that you are turning in all of the appropriate forms. Again, if you don't check any of the guys up here in question 4, you do not need to check anything on question 5 except the adult sponsor checklist, which is this form, student checklist 1A, and the research plan and approval form. Those are the only 4 you'll need to check on 5 if you don't check anything on 4. These, again, are just more of the specifics if you are going into those potentially SRC required ones. If you are not doing any of these, again, you can just skip all of these up until you get to the eye test, to the information checked above. And then you would print your name, sign your name, and you are done with this form. The student form 1A, which is referenced in form 1, is this guy. And this is the one that the students are going to fill out. So you got your student/team leader. This is going to be who the SRC or the scientific review committee, i.e. me and my colleagues, will reach out to if we need to get updates from. So you're going to want whatever student you think will probably check their email, put their name here, their grade, email, telephone number, and then you can include the other 2 team members down here. Again, your team leader is just whoever you think will be most responsive to communication from us. You'll have their school, the school phone, school address, and then in the adult sponsor, you will put your name or the name of the teacher that is running the class that is doing the experimentation with them. Does this project need SRC pre-approval? If they do, again, those are one of those special cases. If they do, please check yes and make sure that you get that in early. Is this a continuation? Again, same as before, most of your students are probably going to select no for this. If they are continuing from previous research, make sure you select yes there. If they are continuing, they will need to provide backup from their previous year of research. So they'll include their abstract and their research summary from the previous year. And they also have the continuation progress form. The year's experimentation date, this can be relative. It doesn't need to be exactly down to the minute. If you started, you're I'm pretty sure we started this 3 weeks ago, you can give an estimate there. And then the end date will be the 2 weeks before the fair. Where will you conduct your research? Pretty easy. Most of y'all will probably end up choosing school. Source of data collection. They can get internet data. That is an option. They would put the URL for whatever internet data they're getting here. Most cases, they are going to be collecting it themselves. So they will select this first one. And then if your students end up, for some reason, if we do hybrid learning, God forbid, they will, and they have to continue their experiment at home or something, they would put their home address as an additional address. Or if they're doing part of the experiment at home or at a different location aside from your school site, they will put that additional address down here on 10.
So Renee, just while you're here at this spot with the collected the data or not, because I know that you introduced us to these different types of science fair projects, and this would be one of those spots where you'd indicate I'm using existing data versus non-existing data.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So if they're not collecting it themselves, if they're looking at pre-existing experiments, then they would put other.
Right, or a database, like the Mesonet or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Then at that point, they would put other and then put wherever they're pulling that information from. If they're pulling it from a website, they put the URL. That way it's really easy for the scientific review committee to take a look at that. Thank you for asking for that clarification, Nicole. You also submit a research plan. So I showed you all the research plan from the Google Classroom. You would just submit that at the same time that you submit this form. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to make it all one nice PDF or anything. There are different spots that you can upload it. And in the research form, there's going to be an abstract that's already included there. So these two will go together, 11 and 12, you will submit as one separate document. This last page is just all of the information that should be included in your research plan. I know it looks like a ton. That's why we have a template. That way you don't need to stress out over all of the logistics on here. If you use the template that I've provided in our Google Classroom, it will have all of this. So the key things here are the rationale, which is just the background information that got your kid interested in the research, your research question, hypothesis, and your goals, of course, and then procedures and data analysis. The bibliography should include 5 resources or 5 sources for the literature review. So just tossing that number out there for you. All of the ones down here are only applicable to your special cases, as I like to call them, human participant research, vertebrate animal research, etc. If you do need these, again, it is also included in the research plan template that is on our Google Classroom. So no need to fret over the logistics here. It is all included in the template that I've already created. So that is your student checklist. This is primarily where they're telling the scientific review committee what they're going to be doing, and then just general information about them. The last one you need is the form 1B. And this just confirms that you sent it to the scientific review committee, that we received it, and that you got approval to do your experimentation. There isn't too much that you all need to do in order to fill out this form. It is mostly just put your students' names. You have to have a parent or guardian of the student also sign this, again, acknowledging that they are competing in a science fair and that the parent is aware of the contents of their experimentation, especially if they are doing things that require pre-approval in your special cases. And then I would end up signing this to give approval before experimentation starts if it's a special case, or just approving that we have received and confirmed that we've gotten your students' information. The rest of this is just for us. So literally all y'all need to do on this form is that first section, just one where your student puts their name and the parent signs. So those are your key ones. I won't go over the rest of the forms because there is a lot of forms and not every student is going to need to complete every form. Again, if one of your students falls into the bucket of one of these special cases, please feel free to reach out to me. I am more than happy to help you fill out the paperwork for this, because I know that for some of them, especially things like human participant studies, they can be pretty intensive.
Renee, will you, I don't know, I think you're wrapping up. Will you remind us of the timeline when these forms are due and that sort of thing?
Would be more than happy to, and I will get a visual for us too, because I don't know about y'all, but when people say dates at me, I understand nothing.
And were those forms digital forms, or do they need to print them? And they were digital?
Yes, they are digital.
So you can fill them out and then just save the PDF and send it in. Perfect.
Yes, indeed. All right, so here's our timeline. You can see research pre-approval. This only applies to your kids who, again, are in the special cases bucket. That deadline is January 18th to get those forms in. And again, they cannot begin experimentation until they get approval. So if you have any inkling that one of your kids wants to do something that's going to get them into that special cases bucket, please get that in sooner rather than later so that they have all the time to get their project done. For the rest of us, the registration deadline is February 24th. The abstract deadline is a little bit later. I've got that at March 10th, mostly because if your student submits an abstract and we want to do corrections or anything like that, it gives us a little bit of wiggle room between when the corrected forms and abstracts are actually due, which is the 17th. There have not been historically very many instances of us needing to have students do any major corrections to their forms or their abstracts, but this does give us some wiggle room. So please try to get your students' paperwork in by these dates. Again, February 24th for all of those forms, the 1A and the 1B, and then the abstract form is due on the 10th of March. If your students are planning to compete virtually rather than in person, we would love to have you in person. We understand things happen though. If they need to compete virtually, then the virtual fair forms, which are a separate beast, and these slides are due on March 18th. And again, that is just to get review. Because we are affiliated with the International Science and Engineering Fair, there are very specific requirements for virtual presentations. Apologies. There are very specific requirements for virtual presentations. So as their applications are coming in, if they are designating that they are going to be competing virtually, you will receive further instructions from myself as the NAISEF director to give you more guidance on what the exact requirements are. And then our fair is happening on April 1st, which we are very excited about. That is so soon. And then for those of you that are just curious, the International Science and Engineering Fair is open. We will be sending 2 people, our top grand prize winners in the science and in the engineering categories, to represent us at ISEF, which is March 13th through 19th. So we still have some time before forms are due.
All right, I'm curious that if my student competes and is a winner and I go on to ISEF, these same set of forms get moved on to ISEF, or will there be more paperwork?
Correct. They will submit all of the same forms. The one caveat I will say is that ISEF requires all of their students that participate to also submit a virtual format that is very specific to them. So they will have like their entire presentation, their research plan, all of their necessary forms completed for NAISEF. If they go on to ISEF, then they will also create this digital, they use a specific digital platform. So they'll create a presentation in that specific digital platform in addition to the regular stuff, but that is the only extra step that the students would need to take.
Right. I don't know if there's any other questions. I do want to ask a question, and I guess I'm digressing, but as we're talking about templates and forms, when I go to make that science fair board with those different parts, are there any templates or for that process for creating the board, or are they basically kind of making it up themselves?
There are a couple of templates that I have that I'd be happy to put on our Google Classroom just to give an idea. The key things you're going to want to do is take a look at your research plan and make sure that the key information on there is also on your board. So you're going to want to have like a section for background information. You're going to want to have a section for methods. You're going to want to have a section for your hypothesis and for data presentation, of course.
Yeah. I could see like maybe students using Canva or something like that to help make more visual boards. I was just curious. I don't know if any of the experienced science teachers on call have any advice there, or if anyone else has more questions for Renee about the form. I see Sean does.
Do you accept Adobe signature for the forms?
Yes.
And how will we send them to you? Will this be email or using ZFair?
So the best way to do it is through the actual NAISEF website. I will put a link for us in the chat. But the website actually has specific spots where you will upload each form individually. That also verifies that your students have their AISES membership IDs. If you all haven't done that with your students already, I suggest doing it now, just so there isn't a huge influx, and that might cause our membership team to get a little bit backed up. So if your students aren't already AISES members, you can have them do that now. It's a pretty easy process, and it is free to all of them. So here's the website where you will add your forms. The students will create a membership portal where they can submit all of their forms. And only one of your students needs to create like the registration for NAISEF. They all need membership IDs, but only one needs to do the registration.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Like, let's go ahead and get kids signed up as AISES members. That will have perks for them regardless of where they end up, and then you'll have that ready to go. How long does that process take? Is it something that the kids can do themselves, or we should sit down with them and do?
It is a pretty straightforward process in terms of actually getting the membership number. It takes normally, I'd say, about 2 weeks for them to get the membership number back, which is definitely why I want to make sure folks are getting that done plenty early.
Oh, Renee, you're always so enlightening on this. You always get the hard topic, the hard tedious topics. So I appreciate your clarity there. Are there any other questions for Renee, or just questions you've been having about NAISEF in general? Next webinar, we have fundraising ideas. Maybe you all have some of those in addition to ours, and I think Renee will at least be talking about possible travel scholarships and opportunities available indeed through AISES. But if there are no more questions, or I'll say thank you to Renee and I'll stop recording. And then if you want to stay on and ask more questions or communicate with other people in the group, you can. So thank you again, Renee, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.